Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. I'm Matthew Freedman, Man of the Oracle, and I'm here with our college football and NFL draft expert, Thor Nystrom, who is back in Minnesota after taking his liver to Mobile, Alabama last week and proceeding to do what one does in Mobile in January, which is watch NFL draft prospects and perhaps partake in some adult beverages. Thor, have you recovered from the Senior Bowl?
I sure have, and I'm ready to talk about some quarterbacks.
Okay, yeah. In this episode, we are doing a general overview of this year's quarterback class. So let's get into it. It's a Wednesday edition of Thor Thursday, presented by our friends at DraftKings. Thor, let's start with the guy that you, at least before the Senior Bowl, early in the process of all this, of looking at the prospects, the guy that you had ranked as your early quarterback one in the class, and that is Shedeur Sanders, who has been one of the most hyped players in college football for the past two seasons. Coming out of Colorado, he had a good first year there and then a really strong second year in his senior season. 74% completion rate, pass for over 4,000 yards, 37 touchdowns. Is he still the number one quarterback for you in this class now that we have totally completed the college football season?
He is, yeah. Shedeur Sanders sits at the top of my board. I love his accuracy, and I love the way that he keeps his mechanics, no matter what, under pressure. This is a guy who played behind very bad offensive lines the past couple of years at Colorado, so he got plenty of experience dealing with pressure, dealing with duress, and looking down the gun barrel, keeping those mechanics, and delivering an accurate ball. That's what we got to see with Shedeur Sanders. The Colorado scenario was really interesting because not only do you have the bad offensive line, they struggled to run the ball these last couple of years. So defenses knew what was coming, and Shedeur Sanders was able to beat them anyway with accuracy and anticipation. He doesn't have as big of an arm as Cam Ward, but he will beat you with the timing. And like I said, that accuracy. I really love his work. Like I said, both in clean pockets and under duress.
All right. I probably should have started with this question, but I'm going to say Shedeur Sanders as the number one quarterback in this class. I don't know if I would say it's an indictment on the strength of this year's class, but I feel like it sort of shows maybe how this is a really different class than what we had last year. Last year, we had 6 guys go in the top 12 of the NFL draft. And one could quibble, one being me, one could quibble on whether we actually should have seen all of those guys go that high in the NFL draft. But we did, and it seems to be the sign of the NFL was really high on those guys, / maybe the NFL really needed some quarterbacks. Where do you think Shedeur Sanders would have ranked in last year's class, and how do you compare in general this year's class to last year's class?
Last year's class for the quarterbacks was way superior. Shedeur Sanders, if you stacked both those if they were combined, I would have had Shedeur Sanders as quarterback 5. I would have had Cam Ward as quarterback 6. And then Penix, I guess, is 7 and Nix is 8. But yeah, the quarterback class last year a lot better, and not only at the top, the depth of it as well. This thing falls off a shelf pretty quick after the top 2. We'll talk about Cam Ward in a second, but that's and we're going to talk about these other quarterbacks too. The quarterback 3 debate. Who is quarterback 3 and where does that guy go? It becomes a fascinating question in this class. And to your point, last year we had six quarterbacks off the board, first 12 picks. So totally different scenario in this class.
All right. So let's come back to Shedeur Sanders. And I think a case can be made for him, and you've made that case as the number one quarterback in this class. I do think the gap between him and Cam Ward, regardless of whether someone has Sanders first, Ward second, or vice versa, I think the gap between them is pretty small. And it does remind me a little bit of last year's class, where I thought the gap between Caleb Williams at number 1 and Jaden Daniels at number 2 was really small. Do you agree that they are pretty close in terms of how they project to the NFL and how you would rank them?
Yes, qualitatively, yeah. I think you have to rank them really close. The thing is, with Cam Ward, you get the higher peaks, you get probably the bigger ceiling, but with Shedeur Sanders, the floor is way higher. So there is more of a risk with Cam Ward. If you can stomach that and get through to the other side and maybe modulate Cam Ward's game a little bit, there's still some YOLO elements to Cam Ward's game. He's a bit of a riverboat gambler. So you have to ride that wave with him sometimes. He's going to give you more explosive plays. You're also going to get more turnover-worthy plays, and you're going to see the field flipped a little bit more. Going to the next level, can Cam Ward keep the explosive element of his game while cutting down the turnovers and putting the ball in play? I think that's where the interesting question becomes with him. But Cam Ward definitely has a snappier arm than Shedeur Sanders. I mean, these guys have been training together. They were doing it before the season. Now they've been doing it here recently. You just watch them throw side by side. You do it like the baseball pitcher and the way that it sounds when the ball hits the catcher mitt. You can see more velocity with Cam Ward. You can see it on tape. You can see it when they throw right side by side together. But again, you have to deal with more of the peaks and valleys of his game. And the same thing speaks to the evaluation. I just think Shedeur Sanders, his floor is so high. Shedeur Sanders is a guy, he is going to avoid the negative plays, even when he is under duress. I think last year he was 93rd percentile, Shedeur Sanders, in terms of avoiding negative plays. And then you look at big-time throw to turnover-worthy play rate, something that I like to look at over TDI and T ratio. Sanders, he had a 4.3 ratio of that. Cam Ward last year was 1.8, and it wasn't because the explosive plays weren't there. It was because putting the ball at risk that was elevated with Cam Ward still. So I think that's just sort of a treetop look at both their evaluations.
All right, one more question here on Shedeur Sanders before diving deeper into Cam Ward. Actually, maybe a couple of questions here. So one, look at what has had success in college football and modern NFL football, the quarterback position. And increasingly, we see quarterbacks who are able to contribute through the ground game. And that isn't something we've seen so much with Shedeur Sanders in college. That's not to say that he can't do it, but he is just not as mobile of a quarterback or as run focused of a quarterback as some of the other prospects that we've seen recently or in this class. How do you think that maybe impacts the way that he projects to the NFL? And then kind of going along with that, if he's more of a pocket passing quarterback, what do you think is a reasonable comp for him?
Yeah, I mean, to the first question, he admirably stayed in the pocket and developed that aspect of his game starting from a young age. And I think that's something Shedeur and Dion don't get enough credit for, is the work that was put in there. You see a lot of young quarterbacks right at the first sign of danger, look either starting to panic or they'll just tuck and run right then. Shedeur Sanders, his entire career has deliberately gone the other way. And I think that in part speaks to why was he so comfortable under pressure these last couple of years behind those Swiss cheese Colorado offensive lines. I think it's because of that, because that was embedded in his head going back years to Jackson State, et cetera, of we're a pocket passer. We're going to stay in the pocket and we're going to impress in the pocket. That's a guy that goes down the progression line. We're going to talk here in a little bit about a couple quarterbacks that we have not really seen go down the progression line. Shedeur Sanders is going to go down the progression line for you. He has functional mobility in the pocket. He can make guys miss. He can extend plays back there. But he is not looking to breach that line of scrimmage. He wants to stay back there as long as possible and find somebody to throw it to, whether that's a broken off route or whether that's within the concept. But yeah, it's interesting to think about him as an athlete. I assume that he is not going to test at the NFL Combine. I would love to see him test at the NFL Combine because it's weird, but it's a little bit of a black box in his evaluation because so rarely do we see him breach containment there and then he's running in the open field. It's just not really an element of his game.
All right, so that's Shedeur Sanders. Let's talk about Cam Ward. And I think right now I have Cam Ward as my number one guy. But again, it's close between Ward and Sanders. Ward transferred into Miami, had a fantastic final season. Right now, if you look at the draft prop markets, they have him ahead of Sanders to be the number one overall pick. A lot of time for that evaluation to change. And, the prop markets at this point are still rather inefficient. So it's something to keep in mind. But right now, it looks like Ward is the QB1 in this class. What are your evaluative thoughts on him? And how do you think that he projects to the NFL in terms of how he would be used?
My comp for him would be a more talented version of slightly more talented version than Baker Mayfield coming out of Oklahoma. I think you see similarities there. You see some gumption testing windows with Ward. There is more, like I said before, and that YOLO element of his game is the one thing that I'm looking to see if we can modulate a little bit. But to your point about the betting markets and some of these projections, like I said, Cam Ward has the bigger arm than Shedeur Sanders, and we've seen him scrambling around a little bit more and breaking the containment in the pocket and stealing some yards in that way. We certainly have seen more explosive plays from Cam Ward as well. He has a really interesting story, Cam Ward. Coming out of high school, he was a 0-star recruit because he played in a wing T offense in high school. He was just totally overlooked. And then you go to Incarnate Word. He ended up impressing there once he was in an offense where they let you throw the ball, and then goes to Wazoo for the couple years and was okay at Wazoo, but Cam Ward was going to declare for the draft last year at this time. His projections, the scouting service, it would have been 4th, 5th round or so if he had been in the draft last year. Last minute decides he changes his mind, goes to Miami, takes an NIL bag, and now sitting at the top of the board because this past season, all the counting stats the rate stats that you like, he improved all of them, and the ones that you want to cut down, including pressure to sack ratio and the turnover worthy play rate. I mean, it still needs to come down, but he did a good job beginning to address both of those different things. So you have the most physically talented quarterback here, and you have a bit of a creative bent as well, which I think, people watching on television, especially, you watch the tape, it stands out, right? I mean, a guy, because it goes up both sides of that continuum, right? When it's bad, it's the YOLO thing, but you also see signs of creativity from Cam Ward that are different, that attempting throws that some of these other quarterbacks wouldn't see, and he's got the arm to get it there. Love the different arm slots that you see with Cam Ward. Like, he has no problem getting that ball downfield. It's just the decision making with him. And the one other thing I wanted to say, you compare Shedeur Sanders against Cam Ward. Keep in mind, I mean, both these guys came up from the FCS. They're sort of different stories, of course. Shedeur goes to Jackson State. He was a 4-star recruit. Of course, he was going there because his father was coaching there. But like, now you come up here, you have the differences between the amount of times that they turn the ball over, and then also their situation last year, where Shedeur Sanders was behind the bad offensive lines at Colorado, like I was mentioning, with no run game. Last season, Cam Ward gets to Miami. He is in Shannon Dawson's air raid offense. They had Xavier Restrepo there. They had Elijah Arroyo, the guy that we were talking about so much coming out of Mobile. Jacoby George could go sort of down the line. They had multiple NFL running backs and a good offensive line in a system where they were going to do the shootouts with you. So it was a bit more advantageous for Cam Ward as well. And I think that in part speaks to why he is the betting favorite and the market favorite to go number 1 overall.
You mentioned there the teammates that Cam Ward had at Miami, and I'm glad you did, because that was actually going to be my next question. And part of the comparison between Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, how do you think about, and I don't want to downplay the quality of the program at Miami and the guys, but Shedeur Sanders had Travis Hunter to throw to. I mean, he had like the Biletnikoff winning wide receiver to throw to. And it just, if you kind of think about that guy who could potentially go higher in the draft than Shedeur Sanders, right? Like, if Travis Hunter went number 1 overall, I don't think that would be a massive shock to anybody, certainly a top 3 talent. How do you kind of think about Sanders had this guy, this sort of maybe almost generational type of talent to throw to, versus what Cameron Ward had surrounding him at Miami?
I think those two guys, it was Jon Snow and his sword, and the rest of the FBS were the descending horses in that one famous scene in Game of Thrones. You had a 2-man squad there going up from Jackson State, going to a program that was 1-11 at Colorado the year before in the FBS. They were the worst FBS program that we had. Worst Power 4 program that we had, and one of the worst in the entire FBS. And yeah, the talent improved a bit, of course, around them when Deion Sanders and those guys went up, but they didn't have a lot, right? I mean, there was places that you had to skimp. You didn't have the resources of an Alabama. And so the offensive trenches was one place where that happened, and then the running back position as well. And then the offensive coordinator, I think you can quibble with that situation that he had a bit there as well, that he had to overcome. Initially, they had signed Sean Lewis from Kent State, the head coach, who runs this up-tempo sort of spread system. And then there was a weird thing where Sean Lewis, then he resigned in November of Shedeur's, their first season there at Colorado. They go to Pat Shurmur. They sort of switch the philosophies there. And again, the defenses still knew that Colorado was coming out to pass, and you didn't have to worry about the run game whatsoever. At least at Miami, you had Damian Martinez, you had Fletcher, you had that young running back that they had as well, where they had the stable of running backs, and you always have the road grading offensive lines with Mario Cristobal. They always have really good trench play. So I just think it was a higher degree of difficulty for Shedeur. Yeah, I mean, he did have Travis Hunter for sure. But I mean, then it was, I don't want to say it was pray for rain after that. I mean, you had LeJontay Wester, you had Will Shepard there this year. But again, the offensive line wasn't good, and you had zero run game whatsoever.
All right. So those are the top two quarterbacks in this class. And you mentioned earlier that in terms of who's the QB3, it's really wide open, and there's a massive drop off from Sanders and Ward to whoever that next quarterback is. Entering this process, I would have said, and I think you agreed, that Jalen Milroe looked like the number 3 quarterback in this class. And then at the Senior Bowl, really underwhelmed. Also didn't have maybe the best season that you would have wanted for a guy right before he goes into the NFL. But still, you look at the dual threat skill set that Jalen Milroe has, and you look at the need in the NFL at the quarterback position, and you could think, this guy has a shot of going in the top 10, or this guy has a shot of going in round 1. But after the Senior Bowl, you really have to question any of those assumptions. Where are we now on Jalen Milroe? Is he still your QB3 in this class?
Can I respond to you after the NFL Combine?
Sure. Yeah.
Jalen Milroe needs to salvage things at the Combine. We were in Mobile, of course, Senior Bowl this past week. It was bad, man. You watch Jalen Milroe's film, and you have the super duper high peaks, and then you have the really low valleys. And we mostly saw the valleys at the Senior Bowl. Now, again, and I tried to make this, in his defense case during that week, where it's more difficult, the passing game initially, all-star events like that, you're learning you're meeting the receivers, you're learning the playbook, and timing and the intermediate anticipatory stuff was already an issue for Jalen Milroe, and that's going to be the stuff that's toughest initially on those all-star days. But that being said, it was an extremely poor performance. What we're wondering from Jalen Milroe, can he ever master to any degree those sorts of things? It's the same kind of a thing we were talking about with Anthony Richardson coming out. Will he ever be able to consistently have accuracy in the intermediate area? Can he be an anticipatory thrower? Can he hit you on the hands right out of the break, right? Can he anticipate that you're going to be open right there, and we're going to throw you open? That sort of stuff we didn't see with Richardson at Florida. We didn't see that certainly with consistency with Milroe at Alabama, and there was long stretches we didn't see it at all. What you do see, it's the physical package, right? And it's the same reason that that it was evoking the Richardson comparison there. Milroe, a little bit shorter, 6'2", 220 plus. He's going to be around 225, and runs in the 4.3s as well, and then has that arm, the bazooka arm, to get it downfield. The rest of the stuff, you're really going to have to work with him in the NFL. And why does he have to, at the NFL Combine, why is that so important for him? Now you're going to have to salvage that free-falling stock. And I do think he gets there. Like I said, I do expect Milroe to run in the 4.3s, 222, 225 pounds. He's going to jump well, and during that throwing session, he's going to be airing the ball out 70 yards. So that is the event for Jalen Milroe. But it becomes necessary now. You start to think, because of his performance at the Senior Bowl, you start to think about his band of outcomes. If he had had a bonanza pre-draft process, that was where the top 10 was in play. You're going to get teams starting to dream on the physical ability. Now, I think you're probably looking at it a day 2 type prospect, and needs the big combine, or else I think you were in danger there of a Malik Willis type fall into the latter part of day two, because teams are going to be afraid there of the lack of accuracy that they have seen, the mechanics that go all over the place, some of the YOLO decisions. Sometimes it does not seem that Jalen Milroe reads the defense very well. Those flash plays are as good as any player's flash plays in this class, but you could say the same on the opposite end of the spectrum of Jalen Milroe's worst plays. So that's what evaluators are going to be trying to parse through here over the next couple months.
I'm glad you mentioned the fall of Malik Willis, because this class does give me a little bit 2022 type of vibes, where you were saying, unsure about who the QB3 is. I feel like it almost doesn't matter who the QB3 is, because that guy might not go until round 3. Whereas, in 2022, we had the one quarterback, Kenny Pickett, go in round 1, and that certainly didn't turn out. I'm not saying that will be the case for Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, but after those guys, it just really feels like there's a massive gap, and kind of whatever it is that we think of some of these quarterbacks after Sanders and Ward, it might not matter, because those guys might never really get much of a shot. I mean, like Desmond Ridder got a shot at one point. I guess Bailey Zappi maybe sort of halfway got a shot at some point, but who knows, out of some of the guys that we talk about next, how much of a shot they will get. Jalen Milroe, I feel like a best case scenario for him is something like round 2, sort of like a Jalen Hurts kind of round 2. And maybe he's on the bench for a year, plays maybe a little bit at the end of his rookie season, and gradually improves, because you can see the talent there. You can see the skill set, but it feels like if someone tried to make him a week 1 NFL starter, that would be catastrophe. But I think best case scenario is round 2, and maybe he turns into something like Jalen Hurts. But what is the best case scenario for Jalen Milroe?
I like how you're sort of seeing that, because he cannot be put into a situation, Jalen Milroe, where he has to go in and start day 1. It will be an abject disaster. He needs more time. That's a guy that should have returned to college. Now, you had an issue there where I hear that the Alabama staff and Kalen DeBoer, I'm not sure how thrilled they were to have Jalen Milroe coming back for next season. And I think that is essentially what triggered the declaration to the NFL draft, was Jalen Milroe did not want to go in the transfer portal and do the whole NIL thing. So that's why you see him in the NFL now. But it's a guy who needed the further development, like we're talking about. And who would you have chosen to develop those aspects of his game? Kalen DeBoer would have been a pretty good start. It's the guy that took Michael Penix from this unknown dude at Indiana all the way to the national championship game at Washington, and then the top 10 of the NFL draft, a guy that had 4 season-ending injuries in college. But it really seems like he didn't want Milroe back for this coming season. He wanted to go more to the pocket type passer. So that's what you get now. So you have the ultra raw Milroe going into the NFL. And to your point, wherever it is on day 2, certainly round 2 would help, because it would be a franchise that's a bit more invested in the idea of, we're going to get you to the point where you can be a starter like the Eagles with Jalen Hurts. But if you were in that scenario, the other thing that he needs is the franchise, of course, to believe in him, but then also you're going to need an offense that is somewhat modulated to your skill set. Even you get to the point where you're developed enough to get in there. Not exactly, it doesn't have to be exactly the Lamar Jackson, initially what we saw with the Baltimore Ravens, but some sort of modulated system. The comparison between Jalen Hurts and Jalen Milroe is interesting. You hear it quite a bit because of the helmets. Slightly different kinds of runners. Hurts was the powerlifting champion in high school in Texas. He has the strongest legs you'll ever see. The tush push thing, the ubiquitously talked about, they want to outlaw it because you can't stop the thing. But you have more power as a runner with Jalen Hurts. Milroe is not as strong there, but he is more explosive as a runner than Hurts, and a little bit more agility as well. But certainly Milroe has more strength than like a Lamar Jackson. So I think when you're thinking about like Milroe as a scrambler, you're somewhere in the middle of the line of continuum between what you see with Jalen Hurts as a runner and then Lamar Jackson. But yeah, the throwing is what you're gonna, again, especially in the intermediate area, the accuracy with it, because the NFL is never going to get to use Jalen Milroe's legs if they can't figure out how to make his arm viable without being afraid on the field that he's going to turn the ball over.
All right, so those are the top three. We obviously have more guys to get to, but first, though, a word from our friends at DraftKings. Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner, and it's the perfect time to get in on the action with our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, they're giving all new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly after betting just $5. This is your shot to make every last play a moment to be remembered. So don't wait. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using the code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. All right, Thor, let's get back to talking about these quarterbacks. And let's start with Jaxson Dart. Now, I will say after the top three, I feel like we probably don't have as much to say about some of these other guys. But Jaxson Dart, before the season started, we recorded a show where you looked at the college football futures markets. Jaxson Dart was someone that you thought of then as a potential Heisman Trophy candidate. He didn't get there, but he had a fantastic season this past year. What are your thoughts on where he stacks up in this quarterback class?
I think he's got a much better shot at being QB3 now after we come out of the Senior Bowl than maybe before, because of Milroe struggles there, and the fact that it's this wide open landscape of who's going to take this thing, and Dart might just be the one who's standing there at the end. We talked last Friday, from Mobile about Dart's week, and it was more or less just hit the ball down the fairway. I think I gave him a C-. So it wasn't anything that he did in Mobile necessarily, but again, that drop off there, and he might just end up being the last guy standing. It's a guy that put up bazooka stats in college. He was a ballyhooed recruit coming out. He had signed with USC. He played in an air raid offense for 1 year. Then he transfers to Ole Miss to play for the Portal King in Lane Kiffin. Put up the ridiculous stats there. His rate stats are also very, very good. You look at the frame. You look at the pedigree. You look at the arm talent. He doesn't have a howitzer, but he can do cool different things with the ball. He throws from multiple angles and this sort of a stuff. Look at all that different stuff. And it does appear that you're looking at a top 40 pick, and he may ultimately be a top 40 pick. He may be a first-round pick at the end of the day. But my concern with him has been the offense that he comes from, and seeing prospects that have come from similar type offenses going to the NFL, and the thing of going down the progression line, something we hadn't seen from those guys in college, then them not being able to develop that in the NFL. And Sam Howell is the most recent example of this, of a guy who played in a spread offense in college where he was given the pre-snap read, and often when that first read was not there, Sam Howell, his last season there for Phil Longo, he would tuck and run. And that's why you saw so many running yards with him. Jaxson Dart, his rushing ledger is decently high as well because of the same thing. Now, I see Dart going to the second read more, but you see him, it's like first read not there, snaps to the second one, and then it's tuck when that's not there. So these other we were talking about Shedeur Sanders before. Shedeur Sanders will keep scrambling until the bitter end behind the line of scrimmage, looking for guys to throw to. Whereas a guy like Jaxson Dart, he has been coached through that system of, again, Trey Harris, he's going to be open most of the time, so you're just going to let it go to him. But if it's not, here's your secondary option. But if that's not there, just tuck and run. That's not what the NFL does. Jaxson Dart will have to eventually learn how to hang in the pocket. When that second read's not there, now you got to go to the third, now you got to go to your fourth, and you have to do sort of the moving gymnastics in your mind, potentially, of making a guy miss. You might have to step up, and you might not have the full platform in front of you. There might be garbage around your ankles. You might have to modulate all this different stuff while you're going through getting down to your tertiary read or your fourth read. Some of that creativity on the fly. It's not that he can't do it. It's that the system he was in, it didn't even allow him to get there. Right. So it's just sort of a black box with his evaluation. That's my concern with it. We asked Jaxson Dart about that at the Senior Bowl, and Jaxson Dart, he was saying, oh no, just go back to the tape. Like, we went down the progression line. No, you really didn't. So yeah, I mean, again, it's just a black box with it. He played in that RPO heavy system, got it the advantageous looks, and predominantly went to his first read. He was top 10 in the country in terms of throwing to wide open targets. And generally that was his first read. Trey Harris had a yards per route run last season of over 5, an eye-popping number that you never ever see. He was just getting pounded with targets as the first read concept there. Again, Jaxson Dart, he has the starter kit. If you're just looking at it from the outside the treetops, it's like that's the starter kit of a top 40 pick. But there is that one black box. And by the way, he's a great kid too. When we were down in Mobile, he was the one guy. He was running to this. There was all these kids in Jaxson Dart jerseys. Jaxson Dart would run over even after his bad days in practice, signing for everybody. So he's a super nice kid. His coaches love him. His teammates like him, etc. All that different stuff. Again, it looks like a top 40 pick. My only concern is that system that he's coming out of, and can we develop that ability to go down the progression line in the NFL?
All right, the next guy I want to look at, Dillon Gabriel, who feels like the Bo Nix of this class, not necessarily in terms of his play style, but just a dude who played forever in college football and played a lot of games, started at UCF, transferred to Oklahoma, played well there, and then finished his career with one final season at Oregon, where he also had a really strong year. He's been super efficient throughout his career, again, has played a ton of football. So he's experienced. He's also older. How do you think he projects to the NFL?
I think he projects as a good long-term QB2 in the NFL, and a guy who absolutely won't embarrass you if he has to get thrown out onto an NFL field, including if that happened next season. He is the inverse Bizarro evaluation of Jalen Milroe, right? I mean, like with Gabriel, it's your floor is real high and your ceiling is right above it. You're living in one of those mini homes or whatever, right? Like, or if you were elevated off the ground, I suppose. But anyway, like the skill set that we have seen Dillon Gabriel over the last 6 seasons, where he became number 2 all time in the FBS in passing yardage for his career behind Case Keenum. That you're bouncing around in the pocket, the little pint-sized lefty. He sees the field really well. The processing is his superpower. He's been in that cockpit for those 10,000 hours. He has seen all the different coverage looks. He knows exactly where to go with the concept that he is given. It's a guy who can go across the progression line as well. And he's done cool things to modulate his lack of physical attributes, right? For instance, working around the lack of height. This is a guy who came in 5'10" and a half or so, measured in at the Senior Bowl. But like I said, bouncing around in the pocket, he'll move around so he gets a better throwing lane, more advantageous lane to throw the ball to whatever target he wants to go to. And then it's a guy that doesn't have a howitzer arm, although I want to give some more context for that in a second. But in college, what you would see is when he had the one-on-one look on the outside, he would denote it immediately and then let it rip immediately with the big time arc and loft. And that sort of his deep the thing I comp it to is Russell Wilson with sort of the rainbow drops in the bucket, was really effective with that in college. Again, you beating defenders, not with the arm strength, but seeing it early and then making the decision early, making the decision with conviction. That's what you see with Dillon Gabriel, a guy who avoids negative plays, very good accuracy, good anticipation, the timing of the concepts. He is always on the timing of the concept. And again, fluid down the progression line. The thing I wanted to give a little bit more context for was the arm strength thing that, again, and it has made the modulations for it, was able to work around to become this prolific college passer. I thought it was really interesting in Mobile when we were watching him there live. It's like Gabriel, his arm live, it looks like it has just a bit more zip than maybe your lion eyes told you on television over the years. And I thought it was interesting. The zebra tracking system that the Senior Bowl uses, they put the chips in the balls, they put the chips in the pads and all this different stuff. Travis May from A to Z Sports, he combined the different metrics from that Zebra put out last week, used velocity, spin rate, and the air yardage data that he gotten back from the Senior Bowl, and actually ended up ranking Dillon Gabriel number 1 amongst quarterbacks in his methodology that added all those metrics together, i.e., you were seeing by the data more arm ability from Dillon Gabriel isolated in those 3 practice days. So it's a small sample. You have to give all the standard caveats, but Dillon Gabriel was showing more with his arm in Mobile, I think, that maybe he got credit for. And Freedman, you set it up well before talking about the quarterback class where you have the top two consensus guys, then an enormous drop off, and who is going to be QB3 and sort of trying to parse that together. I think Dillon Gabriel is going to be a riser throughout this process, not because he gives you the huge ceiling, but again, because you have that embedded really, really high floor with him, a guy who is going to hang around in the NFL for a really, really long time. And I think as we get further into this process, evaluators start to compare apples to apples of like, Dillon Gabriel, we know that he's going to come in, he's going to work hard. We know that he's going to run the concept of the offense. He's going to be accurate. He's going to hit guys on the hands in the intermediate range. If it's not there, he's not going to turn the ball over. I think that is going to start as we go along, as we get closer to late April, that is going to start to become more attractive than looking at like, well, Milroe, we could get on the Milroe carousel, or we could trust that Jaxson Dart is going to develop the ability to go down the progression line in a new offense that he's never played in before. Some of these other logical leaps, you don't have to make a logical leap with Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel is he's discount Tua. We've seen it before. Another undersized lefty coming out of Hawaii that was prolific as a passer in college football, and we know those elements of his game will translate.
All right, so more quarterbacks for us to get to. First, though, a word from our friends at New Era. Get ready to witness the 59th battle for the Lombardi Trophy with the New Era cap. The Chiefs and Eagles have claimed their conference titles and are heading to New Orleans for the ultimate showdown. And whether you're rooting for the AFC or NFC champions, New Era cap has the official playoff celebration caps worn by the pros. Gear up for a shot at eternal glory with the official cap of Super Bowl 59. All right, Thor, continuing to talk about the quarterbacks, and we have reached the, I would say, Ohio State portion of the show, where we're going to talk about Will Howard and then Quinn Ewers. Howard started at Kansas State. He was fine as a junior and senior, nothing special. Then he transfers to Ohio State as a super senior, has a 73% completion rate, passes for over 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns, but he's older, turns 24 in September. Although by the standards of this class, that's not really that old. That's just sort of like middle of the road, which is kind of interesting to think about. But Will Howard, what are your thoughts on him?
Will Howard's a guy who made a lot of money in the college football playoff, a big time riser there. That's a guy who beforehand might have been a 6th-round pick, right? Like if you never saw his college football playoff performance and then they rallied through it, the 4 straight wins, win the national title. He is absolutely in play for round 3. And in this wide open field that we have for QB3, we'll see. I mean, we didn't get to see him in Mobile. The Ohio State kids, they pulled out because, obviously the run there with the national title. But when his pre-draft process starts, what is Will Howard going to do to try to make the case? I'm QB3 or I'm QB4 and move up there. But when you get there, big kid, 6'4", nearly 240 pounds, and he can move around. He's a solid athlete for his size. Something we got to see more at Kansas State, where they run the quarterback more. What we got to see with him at Ohio State this past year in that national title run, you're running more of the wide open, more of the NFL style passing concepts that you're going to see. Of course, he was playing for an NFL offensive coordinator there in Chip Kelly, who just went to the Raiders. Raiders may be a team to keep an eye on there in day 2. If you don't get the quarterback in round 1, maybe we'll be sniffing around Will Howard. But Will Howard has the requisite arm strength. He comes in the NFL package. He has NFL athleticism as well. And you got the proof of concept of him in the big spots during that college football playoff run to the college football national title.
All right, let's look next at Quinn Ewers, who started out at Ohio State and then transferred to UT. Has had an intriguing career in that he's played well, but this past year he also had to deal with Archie Manning at the end of the season. There was talk that he would enter the transfer portal. Maybe he kind of looked into the possibilities for what was out there and wasn't thrilled with any offers that he might get, and so decided to go into the NFL draft. I think that was a mistake. I think if he had gone into the transfer portal, that would have been his best shot of elevating himself into the first round. As it stands now, I mean, we can't even say comfortably that he's a top 5 quarterback in this class. What are your thoughts on Ewers and his NFL prospects?
Yeah, there was reports right at the beginning, at the end of the regular season, right when the portal was opening up, of like, oh, Quinn Ewers has a $6 million NIO offer out there from a mystery team, all this sort of stuff. I was told that wasn't really the case, and that Quinn Ewers, a part of his thing of declaring, was that those offers weren't out there. The Texas faithful, they sort of wanted to be like, oh, well, he never would have transferred away from Texas. I don't know about that. He transferred away from Ohio State. I think he should have gone back to Ohio State and played with Jeremiah Smith this year. I think it would have helped out his draft stock. But again, we don't know the NIL stuff. I don't love him, Quinn Ewers, as an NFL prospect, as constituted right now. The things, like initially when he goes into college, he was being comped to Matthew Stafford, because you see he loves to throw sidearm in the 3/4 slot. You see that with him all the time. It sort of evokes Stafford. Stafford's arm is way bigger than Quinn Ewers, as we started to see during his career. Quinn Ewers does not have that zip. He does have the elasticity and some of that creativity, but the ball doesn't shoot out like that. And going downfield, you see Quinn Ewers have to labor a little bit. I don't love Quinn Ewers, him under pressure, under duress. We got to see that against Georgia. It was like his world was melting down. Quinn Ewers, when the look is there, he runs your concept, right? Like Steve Sarkisian is one of the best play callers that we have in college football. Quinn Ewers runs the concepts well. So when the initial look is there, typically it's going to be out on time and it's going to be on the hands. The thing starts to devolve when you go beyond that, and especially when he is under duress. That's where you start to see, like, he's looking for answers and he doesn't have them. You start to see him melting down a little bit. But it's the former 5-star recruit. He does throw the tight spiral. I like his touch in the intermediate area. Sarkisian has them do a lot of different concepts, trying to layer things out there, levels for the defense. I like Ewers' work in the intermediate area. You have to toss it out, in the NFL. But it's a guy who regressed this past season. And my concern with him is that it's a mechanical thinker who isn't able to go off the script of what he is told, right? Like of the play concept, doesn't have the athleticism to manufacture an answer as well, and doesn't have the elite arm talent.
All right. We're going to talk in a little bit about some sleeper quarterbacks. First, though, a word from our friends at Bud Light.
Hey, you know you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. Great commercial, by the way. All right, we are back.
Yeah, it's great.
We're going to talk about a couple of sleeper quarterbacks, Kyle McCord and Tyler Shuck. Kyle McCord, again, another Ohio State guy. Started out at Ohio State. He was fine there, and then transferred to Syracuse last year, where he led the nation with almost 4,800 yards passing in 13 games. Just absolutely phenomenal production there. That doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL, however. How do you see him projecting to the pros?
There's so many sliding doors with Kyle McCord's career. I mean, like JJ McCarthy, he wanted to go to Ohio State. Ryan Day ends up offering Kyle McCord, which is what sent McCarthy to Michigan. He ends up winning the national title there. Then this past season, Ryan Day's like, yeah, I don't want Kyle McCord anymore this past off season, and goes out and gets Will Howard, pushes McCord out the door. Then Ohio State goes and wins the national title. But that being said, McCord this past year at Syracuse, he raises his stock there. You weren't playing with as much talent, but he showed his ability as a pocket passer. Doesn't have the howitzer arm, but the arm is good enough. And like I said, I like his ability to go down the progression line. He throws an accurate ball. He will run your offense for you in rhythm and on time. We saw there's a couple instances still where he can let mistakes compound themselves. One of the worst halves of football I saw from any quarterback this past season was the first half of Kyle McCord against Pittsburgh, when he threw 3 pick sixes. You still sometimes see that where what is Kyle seeing? But the vast majority of the season, outside some of these isolated incidents like that, Kyle McCord showed big time progression in his game. Still needs to cut down the turnovers a little bit, like I said, but you love his ability to test defenses. He's happy to do that. He trusts what he sees. And I like his ability to toggle the touch, the loft, the velocity going downfield as the situation dictates.
All right, the next guy I want to look at, Tyler Shuck. who, I mean, this guy was in college forever. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Literally 4 years ago, I had him as the 101 pick in my way too early mock draft. That was when he was transferring to Texas Tech after having already been at Oregon for 3 years. He was at Texas Tech for another 3 years and then transferred to Louisville for his final season in college. His 7th season, those guys are normally called doctors. He turns 26 in September. I'm skeptical about guys who are that old and guys who transfer down instead of transferring up or transferring to comparable programs. What are your thoughts on Tyler Shuck?
Fascinating career for him. He once upon a time he was Oregon's next Justin Herbert, and then they pulled the plug on Tyler Shuck the year after that Herbert left. Pulled the plug on him after 3 starts essentially, and went to this Anthony Brown backup quarterback. We saw him in the NFL, I guess, a little bit, and that sent Tyler Shuck along his way. He goes to Texas Tech, and interestingly, you brought up we thought we might see him in the NFL a couple of years ago. The coach that took Tyler Shuck at Texas Tech was Matt Wells, who developed Jordan Love at Utah State. Right when Tyler Shuck signed with Matt Wells at Texas Tech, Matt Wells came out and said, Tyler's going to be a one and done here. Everybody thought Tyler Shuck was going to be gone right away. He's always had the physical ability. It's just he struggled with injuries earlier in his career. He's always been Mr. Glass. And then the consistency, right? It's up and down and up and down. We got to see the best version of Tyler Shuck this past season when he finally gets to Louisville, plays for Jeff Brom, stays healthy all season, and the things that led to Tyler Shuck being the 5-star recruit once upon a time at Oregon, the size, the arm strength, the athletic profile that he has. The arm talent, the overall arm talent's another guy that throws from really cool arm angles and can put the ball on hands. We got to see that this past year at Louisville. I think it's an underrated prospect, and I think it's a guy who profiles as a long-term QB2 in the NFL.
All right, Thor. It is, I would say, officially mock draft season. You have had some mocks come out maybe like once a month. I'm putting a mock out once a week just because I have the disease. I want to get your thoughts on the quarterbacks, where they end up going, and maybe like the teams that are kind of in the market for quarterbacks. I will say pretty cleanly, I think it's Cameron Ward and Shedeur Sanders, whatever order you'd want to have them in, but as the 2 guys that you must lock in to round 1. And then after that, maybe Jalen Milroe does something at the combine to elevate his draft stock. Maybe it's Jaxson Dart who kind of sneaks up from the top of round 2 to the bottom of round 1. But who do you think we ultimately end up seeing going in round 1?
Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. End of list.
Yeah. All right. The teams where these guys could go. I think you look in the top 10 and you say Tennessee definitely could be in the quarterback market. Cleveland, even though it has Deshaun Watson, they would love to get out of that situation. Cleveland could be in the quarterback market. The Giants could be looking for a quarterback. The Raiders definitely could be looking for a quarterback. And then low key, the Jets potentially could want a quarterback. The Saints might want a quarterback. And then further down the board, Seattle at number 18 potentially could be in the market. 21, the Steelers could be looking for a quarterback. Those are the teams in round 1 that stand out to me. So let's say if for some reason Cam Ward falls down the board to the Seahawks at number 18, maybe they take him. Maybe the Steelers take him at number 21 if just something happens and one of these quarterbacks falls down the board. What do you think of the teams that are looking for quarterbacks right now?
Well, I still think that both those top 2 guys, that they're going to go in the top 5. And maybe you can extend it to 6. I see some people having Shedeur going 6 to the Raiders. I don't think they get out of the top 5 at the end of the day, but you're going to see those guys wherever it is. You're going to see those 2 guys really early, and then there's going to be the enormous gulf. Fortunately, before we get to the NFL draft there in late April, we get free agency, and we're going to get to see if there's any trades as well. Some of these teams with the openings will have them filled in advance. Will help us out a little bit when we're doing the mock drafts. But yeah, I mean, you are going to see the first 2 guys go early there. Be interesting to see some of these teams that haven't filled their quarterback vacancy. They're left out on the top 2 guys. The music stops. What are they going to do? Are you going to see people pulling guys up the board? talking themselves into Jaxson Dart, talking themselves into Milroe. Some of these guys, day two, could you even talk yourself into a guy like Gabriel, Howard, some of those different guys. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if some of them guys get pulled up. But there's only 2 quarterbacks in this class, I think, that are the first round guys that you can project to go and step in right away and start.
All right, so I would say the top 6 most cleanly looks like these teams need quarterbacks, and there are 2 of them who justifiably can go in the top 6. You have the Titans, the Browns, the Giants, and the Raiders. I think 4 teams that right now need quarterbacks. Have to wait and see, as you said, in free agency, what some of these teams do. But ultimately, which of those 4 teams do you see getting these 2 quarterbacks?
Tennessee and the Giants. Again, we have to wait for free agency and the trades, but yeah, I mean, but before all that information comes in, that's what I keep in my next mock.
Yeah, I agree with the Browns. It feels like Travis Hunter could fit in really cleanly, and they might want to go with a veteran quarterback. And then that means the Raiders, maybe they would love to get one of these guys falling to them, but it just does not happen. Tennessee is the one real wild card for me, because it makes so much sense for them to take a quarterback. And yet increasingly they're being linked to Abdul Carter, whose draft stock has really shot up. And then I'll just say, I also don't know if Tennessee really is that great of a landing spot for one of these quarterbacks anyway. Quick thoughts on Tennessee and ultimately which way they end up going, and if you would like to see a quarterback land there.
Yeah, I think all that changed when the new GM that they hired in his introductory press conference is like, we're not going to pass on a generational talent at 1. And so I think from at that point, everyone who has a job like mine, they were like, oh, well, these 2 quarterbacks, neither of them are generational. So he's got to be referring to either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. I think that's where we have seen a change with that. It's reading a lot into one comment. I mean, that's sort of where I sit with it. And, until the information changes, we get later in the process, like, you have to monitor you're going to go into next season with Will Levis as your projected starter. Get out of here. So, I mean, they're going to have to do something to address that in advance, or I will believe up until the second they announce that name that they're going to take a quarterback. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't expect that new administration, to start out like that. Now, his comments, they might be indicative of, we are set to go after a quarterback in free agency. We intend to pursue Sam Darnold or, whatever. And it was indicative of the draft strategy, but he was sort of tipping off the free agent strategy first. But that's what we had to see. Are they going to address that quarterback thing in advance? Because if they're not, they're going to do it at 1.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Thor, great stuff. That does it for this Wednesday edition of the Fantasy Life Thor Thursday show. Be sure to catch all of our Super Bowl coverage, as well as the great content, tools, projections, and rankings that we have on the site. For Thor, I'm Matt Freedman, and remember, it is not a fantasy if you believe it.